just a slide. It was, I think, drawn by one of Meg's patients. And we use visuals and drawing to help in our treatment. And it's just a cute drawing, a child saying the spider is not scary, probably a coping thought that she was working on. And it's just kind of an example of, that this is an area that is near and dear to us, and there's so much need in this area. So we're really trying hard to work on bettering the assessment and diagnosis of anxiety and autism, but also the treatment. So we're going to go through all those areas today. And our objectives, the first one is to understand the manifestation of anxiety in youth with autism, to explore the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety, including exposure and special modifications for youth with autism, to review illustrative case examples of assessment and treatment of anxiety in children with autism, and to learn about the STAAR study history and progress. So the first objective I'm going to go through here. The first part is, what is anxiety? We think of anxiety as an automatic response. Most of you have probably heard of the fight or flight response. It's this idea that we need this in our system for when we're in a danger. So if we're in a danger, like way back in time when we used to roam around with tigers, we would want our body to respond very quickly and to either fight the thing, I wouldn't really fight a tiger, but maybe that would be someone's choice at some point, or, flight would be get away from the danger as fast as you can. We also talk about freeze. We've kind of added this to this fight or flight. And when we talk about fight or flight, some people sort of freeze or shut down when they're in fear or they are very anxious. And so it represents an evolutionary adaptation. It's important for our bodies to be able to, in our minds, to be able to have this reaction when we're in a real danger. It's a normal emotion that it typically occurs when fear of uncertainty is present. So if you're going for a job interview or before a test or a presentation, a little bit of anxiety is really helpful because you might study more or prepare more and make sure you're ready. And it's adaptive and typical when you can feel the fear and do it anyway. So you can feel a little bit of anxiety, still get up there and do everything, and there's no impairment or no problems with your functioning. So then there becomes a point for some people when this anxiety that is a normal emotion, it rises above and beyond what is typical. And some factors that we consider when we're trying to figure this out are, one is the severity. So how severe is it? How scared or anxious is the child in the situation? How much impairment there is? Is it causing a lot of interference into their life, preventing or stopping them from doing things they need to do? Avoidance. So are there certain things the child or the person can't do because of the anxiety? Instead of getting up and talking in front of people and feeling a little bit anxious, can they not do that at all? Or can they not go near dogs at all? Or are they very anxious about separating from their parents and they really avoid this? And duration, how long has this been going on? Kids go through phases, so sometimes they'll be scared of something and it will last a brief amount of time and then they'll move on from it. But if it's lasting, depending on the area, a certain duration, then we consider it to be more significant. And we think of anxiety when it becomes a problem or a concern. It's like when a light switch turns on and you can no longer turn it off. So example we give sometimes is, if a child has misplaced their homework and they're sort of, the anxiety turns on and they cannot turn it off and they're so anxious about it and they're thinking about it constantly and they can't think about anything else. And we talk about false alarms for danger. So we have a situation in this building where we're not allowed to pop popcorn because people were doing it and the fire alarms were going off and it was calling the fire company, and we were getting fines apparently. So it was a false alarm. There was no fire, but the popcorn was, putting off the alarm. The same happens for anxiety. Some kids have these alarms where they feel like they're in a real danger, but we know they're not. Like I've treated a child once who had a fear of leaves, a really intense fear of leaves. It was just a leaf falling from a tree. We know that's not a true danger, but her body and mind were reacting as if she was in a true danger. And we talk about whether it's realistic or excessive anxiety or fear. So I just spoke to a parent this week whose child is really anxious about writing in front of other kids. And when I talked to her about it, she told me her child's writing ability is below what would be expected for their peers, and the child's aware of this. So he doesn't want to write in front of the peers because he knows he's making errors, and he feels anxious about that. So, we would have to think about, is that excessive to where that's an anxiety disorder, or is that's pretty realistic based on a difficulty he's having, and we would want to address that skill deficit. So anxiety disorders in autism, as compared to typically developing youth and youth with other developmental disabilities, there's higher rates of anxiety, significant anxiety in individuals with autism. This range from 11 to 84% is a very big range. And a lot of that is because of how it's measured. Our measurement for anxiety and autism, there's a lot of questionnaires that don't do so great at capturing this, so that's one of the areas that we're working on in our research. It's less likely to be diagnosed. So this idea of diagnostic overshadowing. When you have something like autism, and that's pretty salient, and that's what's focused on when the child's young, some people might see the anxiety as just being part of the autism, but if it's not seen as being separate, often you don't get the diagnosis, and then you don't get the recommendations for the treatment that could be quite beneficial. It's more likely to be associated with problem behavior. There's this vicious cycle of social skills and anxiety. So a child could have reduced social skills that could lead to more anxiety because they know they have trouble in social situations, but it could also be their high anxiety leads to reduced social skills because they're avoiding those social interactions. Has an adverse impact on school performance, friendship making, community inclusion, and anxiety is associated with chronic GI problems and sleep problems. And so sometimes when those problems are present, anxiety is the real culprit for it, but we have to look into it. So typically the way anxiety is assessed for in autism is by verbal report. So it's questionnaires that are given to the parents that'll ask parents questions like, has your child told you that they're, scared to talk to other people, or that they feel dizzy in certain situations? And that doesn't always work for some individuals because sometimes they don't verbally report their symptoms, either due to their language level or just because that's not how they use their language. And so there's these other areas that we have to consider when we're trying to understand if anxiety is present. And a big one is relying on the behavior. And these behaviors listed here all could be signs of anxiety. Not always, but they could be, so they have to be considered. If a child is really aggressive, it could be that they're really anxious and that's leading to the aggression. Or if they're eloping out of the school, is that because they're really scared of something there, so they're running away? So these are all areas to consider as well when we're trying to understand this. Our diagnostic manual for behavioral and mental health disorders is called the DSM. And in the DSM, these are some of the anxiety and obsessive compulsive and related disorders. It's not all of them. And I have written up here traditional because these are ones that we have diagnoses for. So you can read through them, but separation anxiety, worry about separating from parents, generalized anxiety, worries about lots of different things, worrying about their own health, their performance, natural disasters, stuff like that. Down in the obsessive compulsive and related disorders, OCD is one that most people have heard about. Trichotillomania is hair pulling, and excoriation disorder is skin picking. But there's also other types of anxiety that we've observed in individuals with autism that are currently being researched. And Dr. Connor Kearns is a consultant with us on some of our studies, and she has developed this assessment for looking at these areas. So one of them is ambiguous social fear. So it's children who are scared in social situations. They're scared around other people, but it doesn't really seem to necessarily be about what the other people think of them. It seems to be for some other reason, but it's important to identify that so that we can help get them treatment. Uncommon specific phobia. We've worked with a lot of kids who are scared of things that seem like not the typical types of phobias, like they're not needles, but it's things like black toilets or prickly pods that fall out of, the seed pods that fall out of trees, or certain words that they've heard. Special interest fear, this is excessive worry about access to a special interest. So a child who's really, really worried all day long about when they're gonna get to do their, look at their Pokemon stuff. Fear of change, so some kids worry a lot about changes in their schedule or routine, and parents feel that they need to prime them or prepare them for everything. And that worry that comes before the event or before any potential change is causing a lot of stress and difficulty. And ambiguous OCD, we just see a lot of symptoms that are a little bit similar to OCD but don't quite meet the criteria. So what's the point of figuring all of this out? The way that it typically works is, we want to help these children, and in order for them to get help, it often starts with getting a diagnosis or a provider saying, this is a clinical area of anxiety, and this might be something you could actually get help for, and your child could get a relief from some of these symptoms. So the first part is kind of knowing that it's significant anxiety to be able to refer and recommend the next steps. And also, the big point is that there's evidence that adapted forms of cognitive behavioral therapy can reduce anxiety in children with autism. So that's why we really want to understand, is this clinically significant anxiety, so that we can get to the next point of what can we do about this, and can we help reduce those symptoms.
So like Breanna was saying, kind of once we know that a child has significant anxiety, what's the next step now? What do we do? And so the first basis when we're thinking about treatment comes from, like Breanna was talking about, that anxiety serves a function. So if we think about a kid's in a situation, they're, get to the corner and they're with their mom, and mom says, look both ways before you cross the street, and the kid sees a car coming, and then he starts feeling anxious and nervous. His stomach tightens up, he starts, his heart starts racing, he starts sweating, and he has this thought, there's a car coming, I'm scared I might get hit. So, naturally he jumps back away from the curb and feels much better. He's relieved, his body's relaxed. Great, that worked. Next time he's in that situation, most likely he's gonna do the same thing again, right? This worked really well. I saw the car, I jumped back, it was good. But if we get into a kid who maybe has a clinically significant anxiety, and now he has to check both ways 10 times, or is jumping back from the curb when the car is a speck 10 miles away, or won't leave the house because he's scared that the car might jump the curb and hit him, then we're going to want to start thinking about, this seems more impairing and severe than a natural response to anxiety. And so that's where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in. And so cognitive behavioral therapy is a psychological treatment that's based on the premise that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected. So that thought of, I'm scared the car's gonna hit me, and that feeling of, I'm anxious and I'm nervous and my stomach hurts and my heart is racing, and that behavior, I'm gonna jump away because I'm scared that the car's gonna hit me, are all interconnected together. And with treatment, we can kind of work on each of those pieces and together have an impact. So the goal of cognitive behavioral therapy is, at one hand, to identify and challenge any unhelpful thoughts. So when that thought of the car is gonna hit me really isn't realistic because the car is nowhere near the child, or I need to check, both ways 100 times because I'm scared of the car, that stops being a helpful thought. So we work on, identifying those unhelpful thoughts and challenging them, and then changing those problematic behaviors of when it's not really, realistic never to leave the house because you're scared of the car coming, or to only, have to walk with mom on the side of the road because you're scared of the car coming and jumping the curb. Those stop being, helpful behaviors, and we want to change those problematic behaviors. So when we're thinking about CBT for anxiety, there are 4 critical components that, for it to be CBT, have to be present. So the first is assessment. So typically with our kids with ASD, this is done in collaboration with the parents, so getting information from them about what their concerns are, what situations come up where the child's feeling anxious, how anxious they are in different situations, and are there any other things that are going on? Because maybe, the kid's anxious, but there's bigger issues that are kind of more of a priority to start with. Then when the target of treatment is determined to be anxiety, the therapist will work with the family to define anxiety so everyone's on the same page about what anxiety is, helping the kid to identify those physical symptoms. So for some kids it might be heart racing, for some kids it might be a headache, for some kids it might be a stomach ache, and then starting to recognize what are those automatic thoughts that they have right away when they're feeling anxious that are kind of leading them to contribute to their anxiety. After kind of everyone's on the same page in terms of information, we start with practicing. So this is identifying kind of, there's oftentimes patterns to those anxious thoughts or unhelpful thoughts that kids have that we can call thinking traps, and helping them to challenge and think of more helpful ways to think about things with alternative thoughts to challenge those unhelpful thoughts. And the most kind of important step is called exposure, which can be really counterintuitive to kids and families and a lot of people, because we're actually telling kids and families to put themselves in the situation that they're scared of, either in their imagination or in real life, to have them elicit those unhelpful thoughts so that they can practice challenging them and practice tolerating being in that situation and not avoiding the scary thing. So kind of why exposure is the key to breaking that anxiety cycle. So if we think about kind of the situation that I described before, where we've got, the car coming, kid feels nervous, he jumps away and escapes, feels relieved. The next time, he's gonna do the same thing again. So we get this repeat cycle of kind of each time that dip goes down, that's him seeing the car again. So each time the behavior's never gonna change. Each time he's in that situation, he's gonna go through this same cycle again of, he sees the car, he feels nervous, he jumps away, feels relieved, and it's just gonna keep going. It's never gonna reduce. But if we break that cycle and we get rid of that escape and avoidance, then over time, he's able to learn that, oh, this wasn't as scary as I thought I was. Oh, that feeling that I'm really scared and I'm gonna throw up, that feeling doesn't last forever. It actually, I can tolerate it for a couple minutes and then I feel better. And so the next time he's in that situation, he's learning gradually over time not to have that really intense anxious response and seeing that the anxiety goes down. So you're convinced that, the way to kind of get things over with kids is to just push them into the pool and do the scariest thing ever. No, of course not. We would never do that. We don't start with the scariest thing because we'd have kids running out the door and never come back again. So before we, ask kids to do the scariest thing they can think of, we give them some tools. And so often that's in the form of coping thoughts. And this is kind of helping kids to challenge those unhelpful thoughts and think more realistically about how, anxious or realistic the situations are. So we ask them to think about what bad things are you expecting to happen in the situation that you're worried about. And then encouraging them not to believe everything that they're thinking. So what evidence do you have that it's going to happen? What's really the worst if we went all the way down the line? What's really the worst thing that would happen? And, maybe is there anything good that could possibly happen from this thing you're scared of? And as they start generating in their own words what these questions are, how realistic they are, then we start encouraging them to do the experiment and see, is it really 100% likely that the car's gonna hit you when it's 100 miles away? Or maybe it's, a smaller percentage. So, when we're thinking about exposure, we first have kids develop a fear hierarchy. So this is kind of going through all the things that their parent reported they were scared of, and they reported them scared of, and having them rate, okay, kind of how scary or hard would that really be? And kind of putting it on a ladder and thinking about, is standing next to the curb the hardest thing, or is not looking both ways before crossing the street really the hardest thing? And so for this, especially with our kids with ASD, parents are oftentimes really important because kids may not always be the greatest at reporting about how nervous they are. They can be like, oh yeah, I'm totally fine, and mom's sitting in the background saying, no way. And then, once we have what the fears are, the next step is really breaking those fears down into, okay, so what would that look like if we were to practice it? Because, this big, scary fear of the car is gonna come out and hit me, I can't have a car like drive into the Mind Institute to practice. So like maybe we need to break that down and think about what are the things we could actually practice doing. And then also, we want to be flexible, because what initially a kid, said was really hard, maybe they thought it was easier or harder, and we might have to jump around a bit while still targeting that ultimate goal of, for this kid, being able to tolerate being near cars on the road. Then, once we have our plan of attack, kind of what we're going towards on our ladder, then we gradually work on exposure. So this is, we start with, maybe being around the thing that they're scared of, getting rid of reassurance from mom that, no, you're not gonna get hit by the car, it's fine. Or, if kids are doing any rituals like have to check 100 times, we're gonna kind of resist. We're only gonna check if car's coming one time, and then we're done. We're not gonna do it 100 times. And then, of course, with everything, the most important thing is that we're gonna reinforce the brave behavior. So anytime the kid's doing something that's close to what we want them to do, where they're kind of approaching that fear situation or anxious situation, we're gonna give them lots of praise, lots of reinforcement, maybe even stickers or toys, because they're really doing something that's hard, and we want them to be rewarded for it. So like Breanna was saying, there are a number of existing programs that do CBT for anxiety. So there's Coping Cat, Bianca, and another program called Facing Your Fears. That's a group-based intervention. Facing Your Fears is the only program that has a manual that you can purchase on Amazon. Coping Cat has manuals available, and they actually have a web-based program as well, but that one's not specifically for kids with autism. But the Bianca, which you'll hear about more in later, as that's part of the STAAR study, is not yet published or available as widely. So these are kind of CBT programs to be aware of, because they do have an evidence base, but they're not kind of necessarily as available potentially, here. So kind of from the typical CBT for anxiety for any kids, there's some modifications that we think of that are particularly helpful when we're thinking about anxiety in kids with ASD. So the first is that, oftentimes we are gonna want more teamwork. So this may be, we know that our kids on the spectrum often have a lot of providers that they're working with, whether that's BCBAs or the teacher or a speech therapist, working with kind of a school counselor, and having parents involved, so that really having everyone on the same page, so that we're still reinforcing all the same goals. With our kids with autism, also kind of like flexibility and patience is key, because a lot of times treatment might go more slowly, or you might have different challenges in different places than with neurotypical children, and kind of wanting to have creativity and humor and courage to, as a therapist, to kind of be a cheerleader for your clients. For our kids with ASD, it's also using interactive and multimodal teaching techniques is really helpful. So having kids draw or sing or dance or act out, not being as stuck on the verbal piece, but really thinking creatively about how can we encourage kids to express their thoughts and feelings in whatever way of communication works best for them, and working with them on how can we get them to that really critical part of practicing and facing the thing that they're scared of. Another piece that's really helpful with our kids with ASD is making abstract concepts concrete. So really not anything that we're talking about or drawing or doing at like a level of like a G movie. So really trying to make things clear and concrete, so that it's not these really abstract, esoteric things that I think people also often associate with therapy. Really trying to make things understandable for our clients. And then really trying to integrate our kids' special interests into sessions. So if a kid's into SpongeBob, we're gonna be brave like SpongeBob. We're gonna find SpongeBob episodes where he does something brave. We're really gonna try to harness that interest to help shape the behavior that we wanna see, which is approaching the things that we think about. So kind of one example of how we've incorporated kids' special interests. So here we have kind of fear thermometer, where we're having the kids rank kind of how scary a situation is for them. And for this kiddo, he was really into Pokemon, so we had him, the kind of slightly scared Pikachu for things that weren't as scary, the like more scared in the middle that he could rate, and then the like really scared Pikachu face for those situations where he was really nervous. So this way, it was kind of in a visual that he understood better than kind of asking kids to rate their subjective units of distress, which just, I don't know, I think is not intuitive to anyone. Another example that for a kiddo that I work with who is really into SpongeBob, so I don't know, those of you who are SpongeBob fans, this snail guy, he says meow, so saying meow is something that is very likely. While he would never say woof, he does not say woof, he says meow, and so that would be not likely. So when we were working on kind of more realistic thinking, kind of using the SpongeBob language with him of, is this a meow situation or a woof situation, really worked for him, while kind of likely and unlikely was not language that he was comfortable with. Another thing is that, we might want to have kind of more concrete bravery mantras rather than complex coping thoughts. So for a kid who's really into Batman, it's being brave by like Batman, trying to identify kind of a character that they associate with bravery and having them emulate it. Another kid I worked with really was into Star Trek, and so they came up with on their own, like, oh, I need to be logical, like Spock. I'm not gonna be, in my head, I have to be logical and think critically. I'm gonna be logical like Spock. For some of our kids, like, kind of dancing around like Taylor Swift and just like, I'm gonna shake it off. This doesn't make me nervous, I'm gonna shake it off. Or, like Elsa, that they're just gonna let it go. They're gonna, they're not gonna be scared of it. They're just gonna let it go, those feelings of anxiety. So kind of finding what, if it's a simple phrase that they can use in those situations when they're feeling nervous. And some other modifications that will, can make to CBT is, being more flexible. So, some kids might need, more time on identifying emotions or rating, while, other kids, we can speed through that and get to the practicing faster. Making things more visual, using drawing. Kind of sometimes you'll hear people say that it's a big B and a little C, so in the CBT, so that means doing more of the behavior part, so that behavioral part of actually just the practicing and facing anxiety, and less of the let's think about our thoughts and our feelings. We're just gonna kind of go more into the actual practicing and less of the thinking and feeling part. And then also including, having reinforcers in there, because really wanting tangible things that kids can work towards, because we're asking them to do something that's really hard, of facing the things that they're scared of. And this isn't in a vacuum of therapists are just going to work with the kids and then they're magically going to get better. Parents are really important, kind of at whatever level of anxiety kids have. So even if kind of kids don't have an anxiety at a clinical level, parents are really important of fostering independence, and kind of encouraging kids to gradually face those difficult situations and having them speak and act for themselves. It's also, helpful for parents to foster and promote the idea that, all emotions are useful and helpful to solve problems, that it's not a problem to be scared. It's really natural and, evolutionarily adapted that we're scared in situations, but it's what we do with that anxiety. And then, that kind of in general, that growth mindset that, like everything, things change with practice. So you didn't learn how to swim by being thrown into the pool and magically you swim. Things take time and they need to be practiced. And that's just like anxiety-provoking situations. And so it's really important that parents can kind of set the stage for this growth and approach mindset. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Meg, who's going to give us some examples of assessment and treatment.
Okay, so I think I have the fun part, which is to talk about two of the amazing kiddos that I have treated directly, and I'm going to give you a disclaimer right away. Some of this might seem silly, some of it might seem strange, but this is what works. This is what we know with the evidence, and it's backed by science with behavioral principles, how we can help these children effectively face their fears and overcome these anxieties over time. So the first case I'm going to talk about, we're going to call her Bianca. She was 10 years old. She had an uncommon phobia of Halloween. And some of you might think, Well, Halloween is scary. It's supposed to be scary, but that's exactly it. It should be scary and fun. It should not be so scary that you don't go to school for 3 days a year because you might see Halloween things there. And that's what was happening for this child. And in fact, her whole family was really accommodating her for those several months of the year so that she never had to see something Halloween related, because she would become so distressed, crying, screaming, running away, to the point that it became a safety risk. They were afraid of her running into a dangerous situation when she saw something Halloween related. The things that she liked, and it's important you know this, her special interests were babies of any kind, human or animal, or anything very cute like a baby. So our initial hierarchy, this is just some examples of the things that we planned to do, were things as simple as saying the word Halloween out loud, which she had not been doing for a while. And even before that, maybe even mouthing it like, so we're not saying it out loud, but we're taking our first baby step to getting there. Talking about Halloween out loud. Putting cute Halloween temporary tattoos on her family members. Holding Hello Kitty plushies that had Halloween costumes on them. Making a cute pumpkin craft. And then we're getting up to the higher level, going to Target, to the Halloween section, where there's animatronics and costumes and candy and all these things there. Going to the Spirit Halloween store. People familiar? Yeah. Spirit Halloween? Okay. That's where you get into the real Halloween stuff, the scary animatronics and scary costumes. Rehearsing trick-or-treating, so playing this out with people in the building, what would it be like to trick-or-treat. Good thing is when you trick-or-treat, you get candy, so that's a very reinforcing one to practice. And then finally, by the time it got to Halloween, attending the Halloween parade and even going trick-or-treating, including the scary, spooky houses. Now, this is just some of the things that we planned along the way, but in between each of these steps, there could be 5, 10, even more little baby steps that came in between, especially as different anxieties get learned about through the process. Here's an example of one of the cute Hello Kitty plushies that we would hold, which at the beginning of therapy was scary, just by the way. And a higher level exposure of the creepy twin animatronics at the Spirit Halloween store. Which, I like these noises you're making, right? These are natural reactions. They are scary even to you. But this is an important point that when we are doing this type of treatment, we're not just aiming for the bare minimum, we're shooting even higher. We want them to get as comfortable as possible, even with the highest level types of stimuli from that category, in this case, Halloween, because real life is going to have those types of things, and we want her to feel confident in those situations. So some examples of specialized strategies that helped Bianca go through that hierarchy that I just went through are things like very individualized mantras. So this is very different from what you would expect, like, I can do it, I can do anything, I can face it, things like that. These are just things that she was able to say, and I was able to say with her, that would make her feel more brave or more confident in a situation. Like, maybe it's cute. Even about the animatronics, the spooky twins. It's so heavy. I'm going to demonstrate this one for you. So kind of a fun game that we built around the different stimuli that we were looking at. For example, a pumpkin bucket, okay, very scary at the beginning of treatment, would be maybe it's heavy, and then we would try to pick it up and pretend it was really heavy. This is an example of one of the things I warned you might seem silly, but was extremely enjoyable to this child and was something that would help her get ready to face something. The idea that she could try to pretend to pick it up and pretend it was really heavy. And of course, saying it's a baby, even about a spider like this one. It's a baby, helped in those initial exposures to get her ready to face the fear. Lots and lots of drawing out scenarios. So just like Dr. Allison just talked about, we're not focusing just on the verbal, the talking about it. We were drawing out, what is it going to look like to trick or treat? What are those steps going to be like through pictures? Creating a lot of fun backstories and games with the Halloween stimuli. So every skeleton we encountered had a whole history and a job and things it liked and didn't like and friends and family. And games like, I'll show you a picture in a minute, tying strings to plastic rats and bats and spiders, and her sister chasing each other around the house or racing them through the hallway in their house. A lot of focus on the exposure. This is back to that idea of big B, little c. We're not going to take a lot of sessions, trying to rationalize these fears or talk about them at length. We just want to get right into it. We want to start going for the exposures right away and showing the child that they can build confidence as quickly as possible. This one included what I think of as sensory exposure, so the touching of the items and even like touching to the face the items. This is a kind of exposure that I find really helpful in this particular case and many of our cases of children with autism, that if we can experience the stimuli in different sensory ways, we also build confidence. And a lot of rapid rewards. So I think we think about rewards often as things like point charts or things like that, but in this particular case, in many of the cases that I treat, we're actually doing it much, much quicker than that. So one obvious one is we're pretending to trick or treat. You say trick or treat, someone gives you candy, you get to eat candy. That's a very rapid reward. But other things like, for example, when we're at the Spirit Halloween store, we look at the Michael Myers animatronic, but then we look at the cute baby costumes. Right? So there's this really fast switch between we're trying something scary, but then we're doing something really fun and more reinforcing right afterwards. And in a session, that kind of back and forth can happen, 100 times sometimes. Just really, really rapidly showing the child that they're comfortable in that moment and we can move on to the next thing. Here's one of our rat buddies for the races. Wow, gasping. This is an example of how her mom would pick her up from school. Okay, so creativity, back to creativity and flexibility and the importance of practicing between sessions. We were not just doing exposures and sessions. This was something every day that needed to be practiced. Mom had the great idea, what if I pick her up with a dressed up skeleton in the car? And I was like, yeah. Go for it. Let's do it. So this is how she started getting picked up from school. No, okay, whoever's saying, oh no, it's oh yes. This was curing a phobia. And this was a case I treated last year for Halloween 2018 and was successful. And this is a brand new picture from Halloween 2019 where Bianca has actually helped her family create a whole spooky graveyard in her front yard. And needless to say, can go to school and enjoys it on Halloween Day. Okay, one more case example. This one is Charlie. He was 8 years old. He had an uncommon phobia of being touched by a butterfly. Most specifically, he was very fearful that one day a butterfly would touch his face. So obviously, this fear has a very strong sensory component as well. He would run away and would repeatedly ask for his preferred items to be with him, to the point that when treatment was started, Mom was carrying around a backpack just of toys and things that made him feel safe, and even in some situations was carrying around one of his special interests, a wacky, waveable, inflatable arm man, deflated, in a bag wherever they went. I should have put a picture of one, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Right? Okay. Like out. There, okay, look at that, see? Didn't need a picture, everybody knows. And also YouTube. Okay, so here's an example of an initial hierarchy for Charlie, who was afraid of a butterfly touching his face. So things like watching videos of cartoon butterflies, kind of like you see on the screen right now, watching videos of real butterflies, imaginal exposures of encountering a butterfly. So this means we were just pretending. We're in the room, there's a butterfly. We're just pretend playing that there's a butterfly there, or closing our eyes and imagining what it would be like if we saw a butterfly. Simulated exposures. So I'm going to need Breanna to come up for another demonstration. So this was things like this, where starting out, literally let's start with your hand. Just things like this. I am rubbing a Kleenex on your hand, right? Very specifically, yes. Thank you for that realistic reaction. And moving up to something like, I am, get closer. I am rubbing a Kleenex on your cheek. And moving up to, now you're gonna close your eyes and we're just gonna pretend it's a butterfly. Let's pretend it's a butterfly.
I don't know, Dr. May.
Thank you. Again, very realistic, very realistic. And so we're doing things that, again, this is hard for me to get a butterfly and actually touch it to his cheek, things like that. So we're simulating and pretending along the way, and even that is actually a huge step in working towards our ultimate goal of being around butterflies. Going for a walk with only 2 of the safety items, so we're leaving the wacky, waveable, inflatable arm man, that's a very long phrase, at home at this point, right? And then we're paring down, fading out all those different safety items that Charlie needed. So we're down to 2, we're down to 1, and eventually we don't have any of those safety items anymore. Riding his bike again, and by the way, being very aware that we might encounter a butterfly. Right? We're talking about that all the time. There might be a butterfly at any point. We want to be really, really aware of it. Always facing the fear, even if the fear isn't present. We want to be aware that it could happen. And ultimately visiting a butterfly exhibit. Yay! So butterflies flying all around, actually landing on him and feeling comfortable in the situation. Okay, some of the specialized strategies for Charlie were things like, I can handle it, so a more commonplace type of mantra, and I can do more now than when I was a baby. So it was really helpful for him to think back, I couldn't walk at one point, and now I can, and now I'm 8 and I'm afraid of butterflies, but maybe in the future, I won't be. Maybe age 9, I won't be anymore. So thinking about how things had changed in the past. Highly individualized rewards. So for Charlie, this was him making YouTube in quotes because they weren't really put on YouTube. They were just videos that he created at home, and then he would bring them to share with me, and they would teach me about Minecraft or other things that he liked at that time. And so we would do things like do an exposure, then we can watch a minute of the YouTube video that he made for me. So again, back to that rapid reward idea. He also had another channel, it wasn't a real channel, the butterfly YouTube channel where he would learn a new fact about a butterfly and would share it in his videos that he created. And we did use the safety items in the beginning and then was fading them out. So it was really important in those initial exposures that we had all those things that made him feel comfortable, but then the exposure in and of itself was taking out all of those different safety items. And then, as I had mentioned just a moment ago, keeping that behavioral momentum really, really high in the sessions so that he was encouraged and wanting to do the next exposure, getting excited to do the next exposure. So the example of the YouTube videos. Another one was the sleep game where he would pretend to be boring and I would pretend to fall asleep. And then he would have to find a way to wake me up. So I bring this up because, again, I want it to be clear what kind of creativity and flexibility we have to do to make this really effective in the session. And we who treat these children joke a lot that if someone randomly saw 1 minute of some of our sessions, they might be like, what are they doing? This isn't therapy. She's pretending to sleep, things like that. But it is. It actually is. That's reinforcing, and it keeps the child motivated. So we will figure out what that is, whatever it may be, and we will do that to keep them facing their fears. This is a note that Charlie wrote me at the end of therapy, and I share it here because I was so happy that he put, I'll keep practicing. And all throughout these cases that I'm talking about now and all the cases we're talking about today, they're not designed for treatment to end when therapy actually ends. We're trying to help families feel comfortable using these strategies long after therapy has ended because other anxieties will come up. We know they will. We don't always know what they're going to be, but the exact same principles are going to apply, and we're hopeful that children and families feel ready to apply them whenever they need to for years to come. Okay? For our last round with Dr. Solomon.
Because we know what a huge problem anxiety is for our children with autism, we were very fortunate to be awarded by National Institutes of Health what's called an ACE Center. These are big center grants that are only given to very few institutions across the country. And this year's competition, you needed to have a clinical trial. So we were very eager to go right away after anxiety, given the wonderful resources we have here for treating anxiety. So the first goal of our study is to better characterize anxiety in children with autism And, I think early on in the presentation, you heard a little bit about how challenging it can be to try to tease apart some of these symptoms and what's an anxiety symptom, what's an autism symptom. So we're working on trying to understand that better. And then we found that despite the real seriousness of this problem, there were very few published good clinical trials that would provide us with an evidence base for saying this is a great therapy. And there were very few trials that compared medications, which we haven't really spoken about a lot tonight, but medications have also been shown to be effective in treating anxiety. So our trial, we really wanted to have the largest trial ever and one that compared both these kinds of CBT-like interventions with medications. And then we also don't really know a lot about what's going on in the brains of children with autism when they're experiencing anxiety. We know that autism is a very heterogeneous condition. We don't know whether everybody's brain when they're anxious looks the same, whether everybody's brain will change the same through treatment. And so we really wanted to address some of these questions as well. So we are conducting this wonderful trial. You have to have an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Now, one of the really cool things about this trial is the whole area of children who have lower cognitive ability levels. It can be very difficult to get treatment for these children. But the kind of model that we're using, which is that Bianca intervention that was mentioned previously, which is an individualized and modularized form of CBT, and that means you get one-on-one with all those great elements that you saw here tonight with a therapist, and it's modularized. So there's different pieces of Bianca that can be used to be more specific to what the needs of the particular child is. And one of the other cool things about the treatment is it's got an evidence base for children who have IQs of 50 or less. So children that have intellectual disability. And the treatment can be modified to use more pictures versus a lot of the words that we talked about tonight to help those children. So we're taking children that have lower cognitive ability levels and language levels than is typically studied or that CBT is typically used for. And so children who are going to be included have to display some anxieties or fears, but one thing that we really know is that it can be hard for non-professionals to figure out what's anxiety. Maybe your child is just running out of the room when something happens and you're not sure whether that's anxiety or behavior problems or whatever. So we have prepared some really good videos that you can watch on Facebook Live in order to see if your child may have anxiety, and then you can bring them in and we can do a more formal assessment. Another thing is, because it's a clinical trial and because we need to do rigorous comparisons across groups, there are some exclusion criteria. So we can't guarantee that every child's going to qualify. If you're already taking a lot of medications or you're already receiving a lot of similar treatments, we may not be able to accommodate you in the trial, but it's a case-by-case basis, and if you think you could be eligible, we would love to talk to you more about it. Also, you need to be able to understand English, although I will say that we've had some really good success now using our interpreters in the hospital. Some of the language used to describe anxiety and to do some of the assessments does require some ability to understand subtle language, but we have been using interpreters. So first, what we would do if you're interested in coming into the study is we'll do a phone screening, and we can figure out, is it worth it to have you come on in? We do an in-person screening, and that's 2 to 3 half days with Dr. Breanna. And you will come to the Mind Institute. She will do an anxiety interview with the parent, and we will work with the child. There are some medical exams that are required just to make sure that we're keeping you safe, your child safe, and a blood draw. And then we'll have you come back to do a scan. And we have wonderful behavioral support for children who might be afraid to go in the MRI scanner. We can help you to train your child to make that a less frightening experience. Initially, people thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be really terrible. We're working with children with autism. They are going to hate the scan. Actually, as it turns out, it's kind of an idiosyncratic thing. Some of the children actually like the scanner because there's no other children or other noxious stimuli in there. They're just in there alone. So we can't really predict, but we will try to help you to get your child through that successfully so it's not a frightening experience. And then we're offering 16 weeks of, we randomize everybody because it's a clinical trial. So you would be, we have a special program that will say we're going to assign you to either receive CBT or receive medication or receive pill placebo. We're not going to know that. Pill placebo is not an active medication, but at the end of this course of 16 weeks, if we find out, we'll do what we call breaking the blind. We'll find out if your child was receiving medication but wasn't the real medication, then you receive your choice of the treatment that you want. So you could either get CBT or you could get active medication. Some of our families have even gone on and gotten medication from their doctor, but we'll get CBT from us. Another thing we do is we put you on the waiting list right away when you come in, because these wonderful therapists are hard to get in our clinic, but by the time you're through the trial, if you got active medication but you really wanted CBT, you're pretty much closer to the front of the line to get CBT as well in our clinic. So, and we do med checks in the med arm every other week by telephone, so you don't have to come in as frequently, but some families like to come in frequently. It's a good opportunity to check in with us about how everything is going. And with CBT, you will be coming in every week. So you receive a wonderful clinical evaluation with a very gold standard anxiety measure. And as we've been telling you, it's kind of hard to assess anxiety sometimes in these children. So that's going to provide you a lot of clarity. We also are finding some of our empirical work now that some of the questionnaires that most people give kids with autism don't really match these gold standard measures all that well, especially if your child has intellectual disability. So getting this gold standard interview is really great. And we'll be offering you monitoring, anxiety treatment. You do get compensation for each assessment visit before and after treatment, and it's up to about $500. And you also do get a letter of information about your child's performance on the behavioral assessments, and that can be useful in school settings and for other reasons, just to show your other physicians or to get services sometimes even. Knowing what in a clinical trial, as I've started to talk about, there is something called a placebo. Because if we gave everybody medication, some people say that it's just the attention of being in a trial and seeing a doctor every week or friendly staff here every week that makes everybody think they're getting better. So that's why we need to have an active placebo condition where you're really not getting medication. But as I said, if you are assigned to that condition, which is super helpful and super critical for everyone in the field to know whether this is really medication scientifically helpful, you will get real treatment at the end of that period. Ideal candidates are going to be children who recently received an anxiety disorder diagnosis and aren't receiving treatment, and they're experiencing anxiety symptoms and are seeking additional treatments, and families who are open to CBT or medication and placebo, and you're having a hard time finding really excellent treatment from professionals. There's a lot of great treatments available in the Sacramento area. I'm really coming to appreciate it. It's very heartening to see. But to brag a bit, this is really NIH-sponsored clinical trial, the highest level. The therapy we're using, Bianca, was recently in a multi-site study tested against the coping cat intervention and proved to be more efficacious overall than that treatment. And you can see the high level of the providers here from the wonderful presentations. It's a really great treatment, and it's free, and you even get paid. And I think you get really good service here. So we would love to chat with you more about this if it's something you're interested in. Frequently asked questions about MRI. We don't use sedation. We don't use dyes. We do a mock scan with every kid. That's part of that whole process of trying to make your child more comfortable in the scanner. We have these great curtains that we put up in there with planets. We make the scanner look like a rocket ship. We go into a room beforehand and we let the kids play video games. And the actual task they do is very interesting task because it doesn't require them to do anything other than to look for a yellow star on a screen. There's faces, but those are kind of incidental because we've found that kids with high anxiety look at fearful faces longer. That's a finding across the literature. And this paradigm has been ingeniously devised so that even kids who have intellectual disability, all they have to do is just follow the directions to look at the yellow star. Blood draws. So keeping with the Halloween theme of tonight, we have amazing phlebotomists here at the Mind who are expert in drawing blood from kids who are afraid. And as a team, I'm actually really proud of the fact that we've worked really hard with families that were having a lot of problem with a blood draw to make it a much less noxious kind of experience for the children, and actually are pioneering a little scale to see what happens, because it's kind of a natural exposure that you have to come back here. To keep your children safe, we have to test their blood levels if they're in the med or pill placebo condition, so they do need blood draws, and we need to keep everybody doing that because we have to keep it blind. So you do have to have blood draws to the study. And for some children, that actually has the interesting benefit of providing exposures that we weren't necessarily even meaning to give them, because a lot of children have difficulty going to the doctor and having blood draws in regular medical exams. So it's proven to be a benefit. And so we're working on this new scale now, and maybe some case studies for the literature even. And another thing that they do to really help is we have special headsets that they can watch virtual reality things while they're getting their blood drawn. So, and you can always be in the room. Medication, it's Zoloft. Sertraline's got a really long history of being safe for children. That's why we picked it. It's been effective in treating anxiety for typically developing kids. You're going to be monitored carefully. So far, no big adverse events at all have occurred with this, but we have to report back to our Data Safety Monitoring Board to make sure there's no adverse effects to medication. I know that some parents are a little bit afraid of medication. We've produced, along with our study pediatrician, Dr. Linda Copeland, who's a wonderful physician who's been in the community for many years, a special Facebook Live on medication, where she talked about medication from the perspective of a physician, and even came out and said that if it was her child, she would want them on medication if they had anxiety. And you can talk to a pediatrician at any time about any concerns before or after. So we know a lot of families are a little worried about that. And anyway, so this is our Autism Center of Excellence graphic, and it's so exciting to finally have received one of these for me. Having been here for many years, we've competed a couple times, and so I'm really proud to be involved with the first one we got. Not as a network, we've had them as networks, but we are the main site here. And so I'm the PI, and you can always call or contact me if you have any questions. And our recruitment coordinator is Taryn Heckers. There's her contact information. And tonight we have with us Connor Davis, who's one of our study coordinators, who's helped create some of the materials to try to help the children be more comfortable in the study. So we can do interviews by Zoom, and Connor's made great parent instructions on doing Zoom. We can have your children watch a social story about the study, and Connor's helped with that as well. So,
some of the main points that we talked about today is that anxiety is very much a real problem that is affecting many children with autism, and it may present differently in children with autism. CBT can be a very effective treatment for these children. I've come up a little bit today, but I'll say it again. It is difficult to get this treatment, although we do know it is effective, and that's why it's one of our main goals here at Mind to keep training more and more providers to be able to do this. And effective treatment is going to require a lot of flexibility and creativity and integration of special interests to be really effective for these children. And lastly, here at Mind, we are trying through research and through training to really better understand and provide more services for children that have autism and anxiety. And I just want to, on behalf of all of us, thank you all so much for your interest in this topic, because it's something we care a lot about, and it's very heartening to know that so many other people are interested in it as well.
I'm just wondering, I noticed that the study is for 8 to 14-year-olds. What do you have to say for somebody like me whose son is only 6 years old?
So treatment is mostly studied. Okay, we maybe won't make eye contact. So in these trials, like the one we're doing here, they've mainly been studied with children 8 or above, but we do also know from some research and from our clinical experience, it is also effective in younger children, and Breanna and I treat children as young as 3 sometimes, so it's totally feasible to use that treatment with a younger child. I think, again, it will just be an issue of finding the right provider and the right resource for it, including us at the Mind. We are one of those resources, but we have a very long wait list right now. But these principles definitely still apply to a 6-year-old.
Can I just add that we have started to do provider workshops for treating anxiety in autism, and we, through those workshops, have met other providers in the community, because that's our goal, is because our wait list is long, to be able to, you know, if you get referred, you get a letter saying that we're at capacity, but there's a list of other people that we've helped to train to some degree, or they've attended our workshops. So if you contact the Mind Institute, you can get both our information, but also the community providers that we've been trying to work with.
Hi, my name's Trissa, and I have a 12-year-old son who has not been diagnosed with ASD, but is in the evaluation process. But he has had the anxiety diagnosis since he's been 6. And he was prescribed antidepressants about 3 months ago, but he has not taken it because he also has co-occurring disorders like a heart disorder and a hearing disorder. And before I actually agreed to put him on antidepressant, I wanted to rule out physical things and make sure with his heart defect that it would be safe, in fact, to take antidepressants because he does have long QT, which could affect the interval of his heart rhythm. So my question is, how would he fall in the category of being qualified, since he doesn't have the ASD but does have anxiety, was prescribed antidepressants, but we chose to wait, and really he's never filled the prescription and never utilized it? So how would you guys consider something like that?
Well, I definitely think it would be worth you giving us a call. If he's in the process of the ASD diagnosis, that would be part of the evaluation that we would do here as well. In terms of, I'm not a medical doctor, so I really can't speak to the heart issues and the safety of the medication, but our physicians, our study physicians, could certainly speak to you about that, if he should be, randomized to one of the medication conditions, and before that as well. So I think a good thing to do would be to get our study information. You can tell me your name, so I'll tell our study coordinator to look out for you, and then we can put you in touch with a study physician.
I have 3 kids. 2 have been diagnosed with autism. The other one that I'm questioning has been diagnosed with autism-like symptoms, mood disorder, anxiety. She's on Ritalin and Tenex, and she has sleeping issues, GI issues. I think she would be great for your test group. Would she qualify?
Has she been assessed for ASD before? And if she has not been diagnosed as having ASD, if you believe they were good diagnoses, then no, you don't. Okay, why don't you call and we can chat more about it?
I have a son that's 13, and he has a lot of fear and anxiety around his allergy to nuts and peanuts. And so I feel like that would be a very challenging situation for you because it's deadly for him. So I don't know that you guys would be able to.
Yes.
You would be able to do that. Okay.
Yeah, we have, Dr. Meg and I have both treated children who have a lot of anxiety around allergies. I have a child with an allergy myself, and there are still exposures you can do that are within the safe zone of not putting them at risk for being, exposed to the allergen. But if the anxiety is excessive, more than what is necessary to keep them safe, then that is absolutely something that we can treat.
What is the time frame of the study? When do you expect it to start?
It has started. Yeah,
It's ongoing.
it's happening right now.
I was wondering if you guys have anything available for children who have not been diagnosed with autism but have anxiety symptoms.
Yeah, it would be basically this similar to what we do on the research side, we also do in the clinic. Something that's, we're really working all the time to address is that there is a wait list, and it is kind of long. Part of that is because there's not a whole lot of people in the community that treat anxiety in children with neurodevelopmental disorders, so that's a large portion of the children we see, but we also see children who do not have any other diagnosis besides anxiety. So your child, if you wanted them to come see us, would just need a referral from the primary care doctor or pediatrician to the Mind Institute for the anxiety clinic. And that's that process I mentioned where you would get, right now, a letter of denial because we have to do that because we're at capacity, but you would be added to a list and you would get a list of community providers who might be able to help you in the meantime.
The studies you've done so far, have they been published or are you still in the process?
The study of the STAAR trial has not been published. There have been now a fair number of trials looking at different forms of CBT. I don't know where in the publication phase the study I mentioned where Bianca was compared to Coping Cat, I'm not 100% sure where in the publication stage that is. But Jeff Wood, who's one of the folks on that publication, is one of our collaborators on this study. So there's really a building evidence base about CBT with respect to Zoloft. There's a big evidence base in the literature about children without autism. There is an evidence base in the literature on children with autism. It's just the studies have been really small, and there's never been a study that's compared the two head to head.
You had posted a slide that had resources and literature such as Coping Cat that were for children that were 7 and above. And I wondered if you have, aside from the recommendation of CBT or getting on the waiting list or being referred to other providers, if you have other literature or resources that are geared towards parents of children who are much younger, around the age of 5, with general anxiety, of just things that we can learn to better coping skills within the home while perhaps waiting for other avenues to open up or aging into them.
Yeah, the Coping Cat kind of group of resources has, it has a manual that is available on Amazon, but it's supposed to be used with a qualified provider. It also has an online parent program where you have to pay a fee, but then you would learn all the skills, basically. It's meant to be a parent educational program, not necessarily a treatment program. And that's online modules that you can do. There's also, some good books out there. One that I recommend a lot is by Tamar Chansky, Chansky, and it's something like freeing your child from anxiety, blah, 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 like practical skills for, reading a book to kind of understand like the concepts and getting down that more exposure-based approach that we talked about a lot today, that online Coping Cat program, but really we definitely want parents to learn some of the skills, but we don't expect them to be the therapist. So I know it's hard to get into a therapist, but if that process can be underway, it's just a lot to expect parents to kind of do both roles. Yeah.
So I have a few questions. One, how many blood draws are expected and what are we checking for in those blood draws? Number 2 is what's the latest you will offer CBT? I'm almost 1 hour away. My son is in middle school. He gets off at 3:15. So that's one criteria. And his biggest anxiety is, social interaction. I think you talked a little bit about it, like, atypical, not, social phobia, something of that sort. So he has like no interest in peers. So for something like that, would you, be able to find an age-appropriate peer for him to undergo the cognitive behavior therapy?
The blood draws are on a monthly basis, so at the initial part of the trial, so I think there's, Connor, help me, 3, 4?
For the medical arm, or for the medication arm, there's a total of 3. There's one at the first visit, there's one 8 weeks in, and another one at the 17-week mark. For the CBT kiddos, it's only once at the screening.
And the reason that we do that is partially for genetic information. That's why the folks at the first blood draw are getting some. There's potentially different phenotypic characteristics of children who have anxiety versus not with autism. And we have other samples to compare to. And the other is to keep the children safe. I mean, there's certain blood levels of SSRIs that you just want to be on top of.
I'll answer the other part. And then in regards to how late we'll do appointments, like for CBT, we don't have a specific set time for that, but we try to be absolutely as flexible as possible. And when I say we, I mean Dr. Allison, who's who's doing the therapy right now. Exactly. She's doing the therapy under my supervision right now, so that's something we could definitely discuss further if you called in about a screening. And then your last question about social anxiety, so this is an area that, again, we just get really creative with how we do that kind of practice. So sometimes it's with other adults, sometimes it's with other children, sometimes we're bringing in siblings or other children from the child's life. It's just really getting to the core of the fear, and not necessarily having to be with other children when we do all of those exposures, as long as we're getting to the core of the fear. So we get creative with that and find ways to practice it.
Also would say one of the nice things about the Bianca therapy is that there are modules. I told you it was a modularized therapy. There's recognition that some kids with autism just aren't very good at social skills, and that's why they're afraid. And so there are some modules that talk about, that speak to the issue of just how to make friends and things like that, social modules.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.